The ballroom was alive with light, laughter, and the hum of conversations weaving together like a symphony of wealth. Chandeliers dripped with crystals that caught every spark from the candles below, scattering gold across the polished marble floor. Guests in flowing gowns and sharp suits moved gracefully, their glasses raised in effortless elegance as they circled the man at the center of it all. Richard Hale, the billionaire CEO whose name carried weight in boardrooms and headlines, stood like a king in his own castle. His grin was confident, his posture commanding, and every word that left his lips drew the kind of sycophantic laughter reserved for the powerful. He raised his glass, and the room leaned in, eager for a morsel of his wit or charm. But beneath the glitter and applause, something didn't align. His smile flickered, not for the crowd, but for himself. A tiny wince darted across his features before he smoothed it over with practiced ease. He adjusted his cufflink with a tremor so small most would dismiss it as nothing, a byproduct of the champagne perhaps. His eyes briefly unfocused, as though his mind swam through water before snapping back. Nobody noticed. Or maybe they chose not to. The wealthy had a way of ignoring anything that didn't suit their evening. But one person did. At the far edge of the room, half hidden by towering columns and trays of champagne, Maya carried herself quietly and efficiently. Her black uniform blended into the shadows, her shoes muffled against marble, her presence as invisible to the crowd as the hands that had polished the chandeliers before they arrived. She was used to being unseen, it was part of the job. But invisibility made her a keen observer, and her sharp eyes never missed what others brushed aside. She saw how Richard's hand lingered a second too long against his chest, rubbing in slow circles as if soothing some hidden ache. She caught the way his jaw clenched before he forced it into a smile. She noticed the unnatural pallor beneath the warm glow of the chandelier, a subtle gray that clashed against his otherwise immaculate image. Maya's tray balanced effortlessly in her hand as she maneuvered through the crowd, offering glasses of champagne. The guests barely acknowledged her, taking drinks without looking at her face, their laughter spilling over as if she wasn't there. She had learned long ago to let their words pass through her like wind through leaves. But her eyes, always alert, always searching, returned again and again to the man at the center. Her mother's voice echoed faintly in her memory, that gentle yet firm tone she had grown up with, asterisk. People don't always see what's right in front of them. Sometimes it takes a different kind of eyes. Asterisk. Maya had spent her childhood in the corners of a small community clinic, watching her mother, a nurse who worked tirelessly, treating people others overlooked. She had learned the signs, the symptoms, the subtle warnings that most ignored until it was too late. Now, standing in the glittering heart of wealth, those lessons rose unbidden in her mind. Richard's speech carried on, his voice smooth, powerful, practiced like a man who knew the world was his stage. The crowd laughed at his jokes, clapped at his pauses, admired his confidence. Yet Maya noticed how his words trailed for a fraction of a second too long before he picked them up again, as if his mind had to chase them. She noticed how his knuckles whitened against the glass stem of his champagne, how his breaths came a little too fast between sentences. Something was wrong. Her heartbeat quickened, though outwardly she remained calm, a quiet shadow drifting among the tables. She tried to shake the thought away. After all, what did she know compared to the doctors, investors, and polished socialites in the room? But the feeling gnawed at her. She had seen it before, back in the clinic when her mother would grab her bag and rush to someone's aid. The signs were familiar, too familiar to dismiss. A man near her reached for a glass, grinning without meeting her eyes. His cologne stung her nose, heavy and overpowering, but she kept her polite smile fixed in place. As she stepped away, she risked another glance at Richard. His lips twitched into a smile, but his skin gleamed with a faint sheen of sweat. He raised the glass to his lips, and for the briefest moment, his hand trembled enough that a droplet of champagne slid down his finger. He covered it with a laugh, joking about the excitement of the evening. The crowd roared with laughter, never once questioning why the mighty CEO's hand shook. But Maya noticed. She always noticed. She shifted her tray to the other hand and moved closer, weaving quietly between clusters of guests who traded stories of yachts, art collections, and vacations that sounded like fables. The words slid past her, meaningless, while her focus locked onto the man who now seemed to be fighting against his own body. Her chest tightened with unease. She could hear her mother's warning again, clearer this time, asterisk. Never ignore what others can't see. It might be the difference between life and death. Asterisk. Richard's laugh echoed loudly across the hall, yet there was a strain beneath it, a crack in the armor only a careful eye could spot. His hand slipped into his pocket, pressing against his side in what looked almost like a stretch, but Mia knew better. She had seen that gesture before, discomfort masked as nonchalance. She wanted to step forward, to say something, but what would she say? A maid interrupting the most powerful man in the room because she thought he looked unwell? They would laugh at her, dismiss her, perhaps fire her on the spot. The humiliation would be unbearable. And yet she couldn't shake it. Her tray trembled slightly, not from its weight but from the storm of thoughts inside her. She took a slow breath, steadying herself. Her eyes locked onto Richard again, searching for any sign she was wrong, any evidence that her instincts had led her astray. Then she saw it, the slip. For a heartbeat, his smile faltered. His eyes glazed, and his words stumbled as though his tongue had lost its rhythm. He covered it quickly, clearing his throat, but the damage was done. Maya's breath caught. This was no simple fatigue. This was something else. Around her, the ballroom swelled with laughter and applause, completely blind to the quiet storm unraveling in their midst. Every detail screamed danger to her, and though she was a maid, invisible to their world, she knew one truth with absolute certainty: something was very, very wrong with Richard Hale. And then, as if the universe wished to silence her doubts, his champagne glass slipped from his hand, tumbling toward the marble floor. The crash rang through the golden hall like a warning bell, shattering the illusion of perfection. Maya's eyes widened. Her instincts screamed louder than ever. This was only the beginning. The sound of shattering glass cut through the ballroom like lightning through a clear sky. For a second, silence followed, the kind of silence that grips a room when something feels out of place. All eyes flicked toward Richard Hale, the powerful billionaire who only moments before commanded the room with charm and confidence. He forced a laugh, tried to wave it off as nothing more than a clumsy slip, but Maya saw what no one else wanted to see. His hand shook when he tried to straighten his jacket. His lips pressed together too tightly. His skin glistened faintly with sweat despite the cool air conditioning pumping through the hall. The guests quickly filled the silence with chuckles, masking their unease behind expensive smiles. A man in a pinstripe suit leaned toward Richard and said something jokingly about champagne being stronger than expected. The others around them laughed, giving the illusion that all was well. But Maya's tray nearly tilted in her hands because she knew it wasn't. She stepped closer, her voice low but urgent. "Sir, are you all right?" The words were barely out when a sharp voice sliced through the air from behind her. "What do you think you're doing?" It was one of the older board members, a man with a thick mustache and sharper disdain in his tone. He looked her up and down like she was filth clinging to his shoes. "The staff should stay in their place. Don't interrupt the evening." Heat flared in Maya's cheeks, but she steadied her voice. "He doesn't look well. Someone should." The man cut her off with a laugh that dripped cruelty. "Are you a doctor now?" "No, you're a maid. Carry the drinks, clean the glasses, and keep your head down. That's all you're paid for." A ripple of laughter passed through the small circle that had overheard, the kind of laughter that was never about humor but about humiliation. Maya felt it burn against her skin like a slap. She wanted to sink into the marble and disappear, but her eyes darted back to Richard. He was pressing discreetly against his chest, his jaw clenched tighter now. His voice, when he spoke again to the crowd, carried a faint slur at the edges. Her instincts screamed louder than her fear. She stepped forward again, refusing to be silenced this time. "Please! Look at him. His breathing is uneven. He needs to sit down." The mustached man scoffed, shaking his head as though she were a child interrupting grown-ups. "This is ridiculous. You're embarrassing yourself." His voice grew louder, drawing more attention. Why do we even let people like you speak at all? The words stung, sharp and degrading, but Maya didn't flinch this time. She locked her gaze on Richard, her voice trembling but firm. Sir, listen to me. Please sit down, just for a moment. Richard forced a smile for the audience, raising his hand as if to dismiss her. I'm fine, he murmured, though his voice lacked the strength it once carried. He straightened, his pride refusing to let weakness show. The crowd clapped at his resilience, mistaking it for strength when Maya knew it was only stubbornness. Inside, she was torn in two. Every instinct told her to act, but every eye in the room told her she had no right. She was just a maid, just the help, and speaking up had already earned her laughter and scorn. She could lose her job, her only source of income, simply for opening her mouth again. But her mother's words echoed louder in her memory. Sometimes you will be the only one who sees what's happening. Don't let fear silence you when lives are at stake. Richard turned back to his guests, raising his voice again as though he could drown out his body's betrayal. Now, as I was saying, his words cut off abruptly, his throat catching mid-sentence. His hand reached for the table, gripping it with white knuckles, his knees buckling under his weight. Gasps rippled through the hall. The mask shattered, the illusion broken. The man who seemed untouchable faltered, and in that moment the entire room froze. No one moved forward. No one reached out. They just stared, horrified, unsure of what to do. Maya's tray clattered to the ground as she rushed forward. But before she could reach him, a voice rang out again, sharp and filled with contempt. Stop! Don't touch him! It was the same man who had mocked her earlier. He stepped in front of her, his face twisted in disdain. This is no place for you. Let the professionals handle this. Maya's heart pounded in her ears. There are no professionals here. She shot back, her voice rising with urgency. He needs help now. But the crowd looked at her as though she had grown two heads. Some whispered, some frowned, and others simply stared at the fallen glass on the marble floor as if it mattered more than the man gasping for air before them. Their fear kept them frozen, their pride kept them blind, and their prejudice silenced the only voice that mattered. Richard's body swayed, his chest heaving as his breath caught unevenly. His complexion had shifted from pale to ashen, sweat dripping from his temple. His eyes darted, unfocused, like a man lost in fog. His lips moved faintly, but no sound came. Maya's throat tightened. She had seconds, maybe less, before things spiraled beyond saving. Yet she felt the weight of the entire room pressing against her, mocking her, telling her to stay in her place. The silence was broken by Richard himself. His voice, weak and breathless, cut through like a whisper. I can't breathe. His knees buckled completely this time, his body collapsing toward the marble floor with all the inevitability of a storm finally breaking. A collective scream erupted. Glasses toppled, chairs scraped, but still no one moved forward. They scattered back, their wealth and titles useless against the frailty of flesh. Maya lunged forward, catching him before his head struck the ground. She lowered him as gently as she could, her knees bruising against the cold marble as she cradled the most powerful man in the room. Gasps echoed, and whispers shot through the crowd like lightning. The maid had touched the seal. The maid had dared to act where no one else did. The humiliation she had endured moments ago no longer mattered. Her fear of being fired no longer mattered. All that mattered was the man in her arms, his breast shallow, his body trembling as though fighting to hold on. Her eyes burned as she looked up at the stunned crowd, her voice breaking with urgency. Call an ambulance. Now. The silence that followed was deafening. The marble floor was cold against Maya's knees as she held Richard, his weight heavy, his breath shallow and broken. His face, once the confident mask of a man who commanded boardrooms and ruled corporations, now sagged with weakness. His lips trembled, struggling to form words, but only a hoarse whisper escaped. The room around them had turned into a frozen tableau. Men and women in designer gowns and tailored suits stood still, their mouths parted, their eyes wide, but their bodies useless statues. Maya's heart hammered against her ribs. Fear clawed at her throat, but instinct pushed louder, clearer. She tilted him gently onto his back, supporting his head with one hand, loosening his tie with the other. "Stay with me," she whispered urgently, even though his eyes fluttered shut. "Don't you dare give up now. Someone do something!" A woman shrieked from the back of the room, her jeweled hand covering her mouth. Yet still, no one moved. They all looked around as though waiting for a savior to appear, as though calling an ambulance might stain their evening attire with responsibility. Maya's voice cut through the panic, sharp and commanding. "Call for an ambulance! Now!" This time, the urgency in her tone rattled someone enough to fumble for their phone. But seconds mattered, and she knew waiting was a gamble Richard might not win. She pressed 2 fingers against his neck. His pulse throbbed erratically, too fast, then skipping. His breathing was uneven, each gasp shallower than the last. The signs were clear. She had seen this before, years ago, standing at her mother's side in the cramped clinic back home. A man had staggered in clutching his chest, his face twisted with the same kind of pain. Her mother's voice echoed in her memory, asterisk. "When the heart cries out, you don't wait. You act." Asterisk. Maya dropped her palms to Richard's chest, fingers interlaced, elbows locked. The crowd gasped as she began compressions, her body rocking with steady, determined force. 1, 2, 3, 4. She counted under her breath, each push strong and precise. Sweat pricked her brow, but she didn't falter. Every second she kept his heart moving meant another chance. A man in a tuxedo shouted, "Stop! You'll hurt him!" Maya's head snapped up, her voice sharp with fury. "He's dying! If you care about him, let me work!" The man recoiled as though slapped. The room fell silent again, save for the steady rhythm of Maya's compressions and Richard's faint, gasping coughs. Her arms ached, but she pushed harder. "Come on, breathe," she whispered fiercely. "You're not leaving tonight. Not like this." Suddenly, Richard's body jerked beneath her hands, a cough tearing from his throat. His chest heaved as air rushed painfully back into his lungs. His eyes fluttered open, glassy and unfocused, but alive. His lips parted, and with the faintest rasp he whispered, "Don't leave me." Maya's throat tightened, but she held his gaze, her hand gripping his firmly. "I'm not going anywhere. You hear me? Stay with me." The crowd exhaled collectively, murmurs rippling like a wave. For the first time, they saw the billionaire not as untouchable, but as a man on the edge of death, saved by the hands of someone they had dismissed as invisible. Their jeweled necklaces and polished shoes meant nothing in the face of the raw reality sprawled before them. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. Relief washed over Maya, but she didn't let herself relax. She kept her focus on Richard, rubbing his hand gently to keep him anchored. His breaths grew steadier, but his chest still rose and fell with effort, his body trembling from exhaustion. "Hold on," she murmured, brushing damp strands of hair from his forehead. "Help is coming. Just keep breathing." The double doors burst open, and paramedics rushed inside, carrying equipment and a stretcher. They knelt beside Richard, attaching monitors, slipping an oxygen mask over his face, checking vitals with practiced speed. One of them glanced at Maya, his expression surprised. "You started compressions?" "Yes," Maya answered, her voice calm despite the adrenaline still coursing through her veins. "You may have saved his life," the paramedic said quickly, before turning back to his work. The words hit her harder than she expected. She had acted on instinct, on memory, on the lessons her mother had drilled into her. She hadn't thought about glory, about recognition. She had only thought about keeping him alive. As the paramedics lifted Richard onto the stretcher, his hand reached out weakly, fumbling until it found hers again. His grip was fragile but insistent. His eyes, though half-lidded and clouded with pain, searched for her face. "Come with me," he whispered through the mask, his voice muffled but clear enough. "Don't leave me." The room erupted in whispers. The CO, the the man who rarely acknowledged anyone beneath his rank, had asked the maid to stay by his side. Maya froze for a heartbeat, uncertain if she even had the right. She was just staff, just a help. But the look in his eyes cut through all the layers of wealth and pride. He wasn't a CEO in that moment. He was a man afraid, clinging to the one person who hadn't hesitated to fight for him. "I'll come," she said softly, gripping his hand tighter. The paramedics wheeled him quickly toward the exit, Maya walking beside them. The glittering ballroom that had been a stage of arrogance and laughter now buzzed with murmurs of shame and disbelief. Guests parted to make way, their eyes wide, their expressions a mixture of guilt and awe. Some looked at Maya with newfound respect, others with confusion, but none could deny what they had witnessed. The same maid they had mocked, belittled, and ignored had been the only one to step forward when it mattered. She had saved the man they all depended on, the man they all praised, the man none of them dared to touch. As the stretcher rolled through the grand doors, Richard's grip on Maya's hand still hadn't loosened. He held on as though she were the lifeline keeping him tethered to the world. And maybe in that moment she was. Behind them, the music had long since stopped, the chandeliers still sparkled, but the room no longer shone with celebration. It was filled instead with the undeniable weight of truth. The invisible had become the savior, and the mighty had fallen into her arms. And Maya knew, as the ambulance sirens carried them away, that nothing in Richard Hale's life, or in hers, would ever be the same again. The hospital room was quiet, broken only by the steady beep of the monitor, and the rhythmic hiss of oxygen flowing through the mask strapped to Richard's face. The harsh white walls, the faint smell of antiseptic, the dim light of early morning filtering through blinds, it was a world away from the glittering ballroom where hours ago he had stood like a king among his admirers. Now, stripped of power and pretense, he lay pale against crisp white sheets, tethered to machines that hummed the fragile song of life. Maya sat beside him, her uniform wrinkled, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She had not left his side since the paramedics wheeled him out of that golden hall. The ride in the ambulance had been a blur, flashes of lights, the sound of urgent voices, the weight of his hand gripping hers like a child clinging to safety. Even now, in the silence of the room, she could still feel the echo of that desperate pressure. Her mind replayed the night's events over and over, the humiliation of being mocked, the fear of acting against the crowd, the moment his body collapsed into her arms. She had seen death in his eyes, felt it threatening to steal him, and she had fought it with every ounce of strength she had. She didn't regret it for a second, but the weight of it pressed heavily on her shoulders. When his eyes finally fluttered open, Maya leaned forward, her breath catching. His gaze was hazy at first, wandering the room, then landing on her face with surprising clarity. He blinked, his lips twitching beneath the mask, his hand shifting weakly toward her. She reached out and took it without hesitation, wrapping her fingers around his. "You're awake," she said softly, relief flooding her voice. His voice, muffled by the mask and weak from exhaustion, carried just enough strength to form words. "You stayed." "Yes," she whispered. "I stayed." Tears gathered in the corners of his eyes, glistening against the harsh hospital light. "You saved me." Maya shook her head, her voice steady. "I just did what anyone should have done." "No," Richard rasped, his eyes locking onto hers. "Not anyone. No one else moved. They all froze. You didn't." His grip tightened faintly, desperate to make her understand. "You saw me." The words struck something deep in Maya, something she had carried her entire life, being unseen, unheard, invisible to the world that thought itself above her. And yet, in his weakest moment, this man who had everything had felt invisible too, and she had been the only one to truly see him. Before she could reply, the door opened and a doctor entered, clipboard in hand, followed by 2 nurses. They checked Richard's vitals, adjusted his oxygen, and exchanged a few technical phrases Maya barely understood. The doctor smiled reassuringly at Richard. "You were very lucky tonight, Mr. Hale. A few more minutes without intervention, and the outcome could have been very different." Richard turned his gaze toward Maya, his voice firm despite his weakness. It wasn't luck. It was her. The doctor glanced at Maya, his expression softening with respect. You performed compressions before we arrived? Yes, Maya admitted quietly. The doctor nodded. You saved his life. The weight of the words hung in the air. Maya's chest tightened, her throat thick with emotion she couldn't release. She only nodded, brushing her thumb gently over Richard's hand. Hours turned into days. Richard remained in the hospital for observation, tests, and recovery. Maya stayed near, at first uncertain if she even belonged there. But every time she rose to leave, Richard insisted she remain. The board members, his colleagues, even his family visited, showering him with flowers and gifts, but he never let go of the truth. When he needed someone most, none of them had moved, and only she had saved him. On the third day, as sunlight streamed through the blinds and painted the room with soft gold, Richard asked for something that stunned everyone. He called a press conference. The media crowded the hospital's small auditorium, cameras flashing, reporters buzzing with speculation. They expected to hear the usual speech, gratitude for doctors, reassurances of his return to work, perhaps even a polished tale of resilience. But when Richard was wheeled onto the stage, still pale but alive, there was someone beside him no one expected, Maya. The room fell into a stunned silence as the billionaire took the microphone with trembling hands. He cleared his throat, his voice raw but steady. I stand here today alive not because of my wealth, not because of my power, not because of the people you all expected to save me. I stand here because one woman, a maid hired to serve drinks, had the courage to act when no one else would. Gasps echoed, flashes of cameras filled the room. Richard turned, gesturing toward Maya, who shifted uncomfortably under the weight of the attention. While others mocked her, dismissed her, told her to stay in her place, she chose to see me as more than a CEO. She saw me as a human being. And because of her, I have the chance to live another day. Maya's cheeks burned as the cameras turned on her. She had never asked for this. She didn't want fame or glory. But Richard wasn't finished. From this day forward, Maya will not be standing in the shadows. She will stand beside me, because she not only saved my life, she reminded me of what truly matters. Compassion. Courage. Humanity. The room erupted in applause, reporters shouting questions, cameras flashing endlessly. But in that moment, all Maya could hear was the echo of her mother's voice. Asterisk. Never ignore what others can't see. Asterisk. Later, when the press conference ended and the reporters dispersed, Maya found herself standing by Richard's side as he rested once more in his hospital bed. He looked at her with gratitude deeper than words. They'll talk about this for weeks, months maybe. But I'll never forget it for the rest of my life. Maya smiled faintly, her eyes glistening. I don't need anyone to remember. I just needed you to live. He squeezed her hand gently, his voice a whisper. Because of you, I will. And in that quiet moment, the maid they had mocked, belittled, and ignored became the hero none of them could ever forget.